And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This week, we complete the book of Genesis for the second time together. Our portion this week is Vayechi, the last portion in the book of Genesis. Our topic this week on being selfless. Really excited to complete another go-round with the book of Genesis. And again, appreciate all of you who listen every week and share your comments and your thoughts. I've been sort of tinkering a little bit with the timing of when I get the podcast out for the sake of just people having more opportunities to listen and just tinkering around with it to see how we can improve it and always make it better. So I can appreciate always if you're sharing comments, insights, ideas, and how to make it better. I'm always open to it. So thank you so much. Many years ago, the shortest poem in history was recorded, and it was recorded by none other than Muhammad Ali, who was notable, and besides being famous for being a boxer, was famous for a good quote. And he was speaking once at Harvard University, and on the spot, he was asked to present the poem. He hadn't prepared, and he simply said, "Me, we." And it went down as the shortest poem in the history of the world. No one exactly knows what Muhammad Ali was saying. He never exactly explained. A number of people have tried to provide commentary on what it was that Muhammad Ali was saying. Was he saying me, we, and we as in sort of a joy and his life is great? Or is it me, we, in the sense that there is me and there's also the we, and those two things go together and sometimes they go apart? But the term me, we is something I want to use as sort of a jumping off point for this week's Coaching with the Bible, but really flip it over in the following way and focus on it in the following terminology. When we develop personal values and personal ethics sets that we talked about, some number of weeks ago, how we do that and what those things are and what our red lines are. So one of the things that perhaps we think about a little bit is me versus we. In the sense of when do I put myself first and when do I put everyone else first? When do I be somewhat selfish and when can I be somewhat selfless in life? And so it's a very important core value. The famous quote from Harry Truman, "It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit," is the question there in that statement of, is it about me? Is it about we? Is it about the accomplishment? And when I have to start to think about which one it is, if it's me getting the credit or people noticing me or people, giving me the accolades, or am I okay with it being the we, sort of the bigger picture, allowing myself to sort of slide a little bit back in the picture and let others shine and give them the credit? It's a very powerful and very important question. And it's also very obvious for a lot of people. We're simply able to see either on ourselves or on others when they're actually trying to be selfish or when they're actually being selfish and when they're genuinely and authentically being selfless in these spaces. And so it's an important concept to sort of think about the idea of being selfless. I know there is a notion out there that no one is actually selfless, that everyone always has some sort of a self-interest. And I wonder about that. But I do believe, and in reading and sort of researching a little bit on the subject, that it does require a little bit of selfish to be selfless. And I'm going to explain that also today. The context of it in the course of the Bible here, I think surprisingly, will be a brief discussion of a particular aspect of the life of Joseph now that his family is with him in Egypt, which is the following. For all the years that Joseph is in Egypt and he's in Egypt alone, it seems clear to me that he is pining for home, that he has a desire to get home. And that when he then actually becomes a power source in Egypt, he does not pursue reaching out. Commentaries are replete with the idea that Joseph does not reach out to the family to let them know that he's alive. He does not send a message, a postcard, an email, a text message an encrypted, coded message to his father that he is alive and well in Egypt. It was an article I read last week that said it's in fact quite astonishing that he was able to keep the secret that he kept for as long as he did keep it, even in Egypt. Right? The house of Pharaoh knew that this person was not a native of Egypt, and it was able to keep that secret for a period of time. Probably today that would not have lasted more than 10 minutes. Somebody would have leaked it out. But at the time, as much as we believe, or I believe, that Joseph had this idea that he wanted home and he wanted his father and he wanted to be back with his family, and you see it in some of the comments that he makes, whether that's to the butler and the baker in the prison, or when it is that he's naming his children a little bit there is that pain, and when he is operating to execute on his dreams. So it comes out when he starts to hear about his brother, and we talked about last week, he hears about his father, and the emotion sort of gets the best of him in that space. Leave that on the side. At the same time that's all true, there's the other side of that, which is Jacob. And the wonder, and this is a debate that I've had for numerous years with a couple of people, about whether or not Jacob has any idea about what happened to Joseph. Like, does he know? And so there are hints in certain words and certain verses, particularly in this week's reading, that he seems to know something happened, but he's not 100% sure about what that is, or that he doesn't say it explicitly. But at the same time, it seems that he is not aware about what happens between the brothers and Joseph in the past, and he has no sense, even if he's speculating personally, no sense of how exactly that happened and how Joseph ended up in Egypt. Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, known as Ramban, makes the comment in last week's reading that he believes that Jacob does not know, and that Jacob never finds out. So how does that work? And so here we get to the concept of me versus we, or the selflessness of the situation. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to interview for a position in Los Angeles in the rabbinate. I think it's 19 years ago at this point. And in preparation for that weekend, I sat with a teacher of mine to go over what it was I was going to give my sermon on the Sabbath, on Shabbat morning. And he developed for me this concept of me versus we, the idea of putting the we before the me, being selfless and giving space to everybody else. I thought it was a pretty good speech. I didn't get the job. I don't think that's why. But that concept was already embedded in me, which is this. Joseph has a bigger play in mind that allows him to put the we before the me, but to put the rest of the people, the family first, before his own needs and wants and desires. That is to say, and Rabbi Sachs points this out in one of his essays for this week's reading as well, that the piece of the family, for the moment and for the future, the we, is far more valuable and far more meaningful and far more important than his own selfish desires to hang and be with his father. And what I mean by that is the following as well. That in the text itself, we never find that Joseph is alone with Jacob. We could say that in those 17 years that Jacob was in Egypt, I'm sure they had moments when they were by themselves. That may be true. I'm speculating here out loud with you that Joseph avoided the space where he would be alone with Jacob because he was afraid that Jacob would ask the question of what happened to you, and then he would feel responsible to tell him. And that would destroy the family. And so as much as Joseph wants to be with his father and wants to pick up where they left off all those years before, and he wants to develop and reconnect and rekindle and deepen that relationship, he chooses the we over the me. He goes selfless over selfish. And he's willing to put the peace and the sanctity and the security and the harmony of the family over his personal needs. Now, who among us can do that? That is super hard to do. But I also believe that in getting to that point, he was slightly selfish to get to that point, that he did think about himself often enough first, developed a reservoir of goodwill and good deeds to be able to be selfless in that moment, because where he started out as a selfish younger person, over the course of his maturation in Egypt as the leader, he becomes a person of the people who is also hiding behind the scenes because his identity is not known. He puts everyone else forward. And so if he can do that for the nation of Egypt, he can do that for his family as well. And so he puts himself down a notch and focuses on them and his father and that relationship for the short term and the long term over perhaps his personal desire to be alone with his father and to restart what was interrupted all those years before. That's the me versus the we. That's the we versus the me. That's the selfless. Where does Joseph get that? This was one of the keen insights that this teacher taught me. Joseph gets it from his mother. It's embedded in his DNA to put others first, even though he doesn't realize it until a much later point in his life. We know famously that in the story, Jacob wants to be with Rachel. That's his first love. And we know also that Leah is ultimately the one that he first marries. And there is famous stories that we grew up with teaching us that in that fateful night before that wedding, that Rachel teaches Leah the symbols, the signs, so that she could trick Jacob into believing that it is in fact Rachel when it is in fact Leah. So as not to embarrass the older sister, the younger sister puts her personal love aside for the sake of the respect and the dignity and the honor of her older sister. The we before the me. And so what it is that we have to think about when we're talking about our own lives and what it is that we do and how we operate and what we think about and how we work on ourselves, especially in a world where we are living in what would maybe be viewed in many ways and in forms as the most selfish world, there's also a lot of selfless that goes on. But it has to be authentic and it has to be real. And it's important here to really appreciate that in the mental capacity, people who are selfless are people who definitely think about others first, who definitely, it seems, have a natural capacity to put others before themselves. But more than that, they practice it. They spend time on it. That when they're actually trying to do good, they're trying to actually pull themselves out of the situation and simply serve. And so a lot of the time, like a lot of the stuff we talked about in Coaching with the Bible, it's in the mind and how we prepare. It's sometimes how we go into the moment and how we then operate within the moment so we can be more selfless in the moment. If we come into the conversation, and I hear people do this a lot, and it's great, how can I help you today? How can I be of service to you today? If you're a leader and you have people who rely on you, who follow you, people on your team, co-workers, employees, and you can share that language first, how can I be of help to you today? It's incredibly powerful because it's real. Like, yes, obviously there may be an element there that's selfish because you want them to succeed, but you also want them to succeed having nothing to do with your business. You want what's good for them because it's good for them. And when you operate in that selfless mode, so then I believe that it circles back. People see you that way, view you that way, and it circles back to you, and then you benefit from it, even though that's not what you're putting out there in the first place. And so going into it with the right mindset is really important. Really practicing it, really listening deeply. But I want to give you one specific thing that I think is really, really important. Practical point here. The next time you have an opportunity to perform a random act of kindness, A, do it, but also B, do it selflessly. Put yourself less in that situation. That's where the word comes from, right? Less of the self. Don't think less of yourself, but less of yourself as the focus, and put other in there as well. Instead of, as Rabbi Sachs used to say a lot, instead of self-help, it's other help. So instead of being selfish, let's use this term, it's made up, it's going to sound silly, other fish. Be focused on others. Give it the space. Do that random act of kindness and try to string together an array of random acts of kindness. That could be garbage on the street. That could be saying hello to somebody who is homeless. That could be saying something nice to a person you don't normally say something nice to. That could be holding a door open for a person you don't know. It doesn't have to be saving someone's life on the street. It doesn't have to be paying for someone's groceries for the week. That's big. That might be expensive. It can be small. But when you rack up consistent small acts of random kindness, you build up your reservoir of selflessness. It outweighs your selfishness. To be careful with all these words and pronouncing them and making sure that it's clear. And you become obviously a better person, but you become a person who is more focused on the we over the me. And you're able to step into a space like a Joseph who put himself second and put his family first. And effectively allowed for what happened to him to fade into the night and never be told to his father. The we over the me. Can we do that? Is it hard? Yeah, it's hard. No question about it. It's hard to do that. But when we begin to operate in that way, when we begin to operate more like the Joseph in that story, in that moment, we begin to operate more like Rachel in that moment with her sister, then we get better, our teams get better, because then they start to pick up on the leader behaving and operating in that manner, and then collectively we get better. So when we, generally speaking, operate more about the we, then all the we's that are out there go up. And the reality of it is, as I said before, it circles back and all the me's actually ultimately benefit. So as we close out the book of Genesis, let's again focus on our ability to mentally prepare and put ourselves in a space where we can be more about the we and not the me, more selfless than selfish, and more focused on other help than self-help. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week as we begin, again, the book of Exodus. Shabbat Shalom to those celebrating. Otherwise, have a great, great weekend wherever you are.